Hey everybody, so today's technical thing that we're going to talk about is white balance. So white balance on most cameras is abbreviated WB, and you will find it on a menu somewhere, or maybe you'll have a discrete button on your camera that says WB. So what white balance is, if you walk into a room as a human being and you have an all candlelight, your eyes will just translate that immediately. Your message gets to your brain, oh, this is candlelight, it's probably very yellow, and your eyes see it exactly the way they're supposed to. Skin looks like skin, everything looks right, even though you're seeing the world through very, very yellow light. If you go into a room with tungsten lights, the old tungsten light bulbs, that light is a certain particular color, and your eyes just register that. You don't even think about it. If you walk into a room with fluorescent light, there again, another color. It's very, very different than tungsten or candlelight. If you go outdoors, the sun is at a certain temperature, and again, your brain just triggers no problem, but cameras struggle with that. And cameras struggle with it a lot. So most of the time when people are first starting photography, they use auto white balance. And for the most part, I don't really have too much of a problem with using auto white balance. I used to try to avoid it a lot. And in some cases I still do. Because what happens when you go into a room or into any setting and you go and you point here and you take a shot and then you point there and take a shot, just the difference, even though it's the same light, the fact that I'm facing a different way and the camera's re-registering it, it's going to register it differently. So you end up with a consistency problem. Your pictures look like they're different colors as you're moving around. Another white balance issue that people run into a lot, and they think they have a broken camera, is if you put a flash unit on your camera and you have your setting turned on to register for flash, that is a very, very specific color of light that isn't really the same as tungsten or outdoors or whatnot. And if you then take the flash off, but keep taking photos while it's set to the white balance for flash lighting, you will get some really wonky color. So the good news is none of the pictures that have weird color because of an incorrect white balance setting are ruined. You can take them into Lightroom and you can correct the white balance very easily. I'll eventually go into some examples of how to use Lightroom. Anybody who's interested in photography, and if anybody has a huge number of photos and you're like overwhelmed on how to keep track of them, Lightroom is the thing for you. And I will start showing some examples of taking photos into Lightroom and processing them down as, after we go along the days. That's on my calendar out a few days out. But if you already use Lightroom, there is an eyedropper tool. And when you go into the color control settings, and that little eyedropper tool is supposed to be hovered over a neutral color, ideally something in the middle gray range. And you click on that, and as you actually hover over, before you've even clicked, in your little tiny preview window, you can see how it's going to affect the color. And as you drag it around and find a neutral spot to assign your white balance, once you've found it, skin tone is going to look tons better. Everything is going to look much more accurate to what you see in real life versus what happens when you get unusual white balance. So here's my recommendation for white balance. If you're just learning photography and you're still struggling with the shutter speed and aperture and ISO and everything else, you may not want to take on white balance manual control right away. But if you are going to be in a specific situation, so your white balance settings, a lot of times they'll list like tungsten, fluorescent, shade, cloudy, all these different little lighting scenarios. If you're going to be shooting a lot of images that are in the same basic type of setup, let's say all of them are in the shade outside, setting it by hand to the shade choice and then working within that while you're out there can be really helpful in terms of making your photos look consistent later. One other suggestion I always make to all of my photography students, if you're going to play around with manually setting your white balance, I highly recommend before you put your camera away that day that you put it back to auto white balance. If somebody sets their camera aside for a couple of months and they're not really into photography, like hardcore, if you've messed around with white balance, put the camera away, and then come back to it a couple months later, you're going to take some photos, and the color is going to be so screwed up, and you won't remember what you did to create that change. So by putting it back at the end of the day each day when you're done shooting, that way the next day when you pull it out, you're fine. If you take it out the next day, you're going to remember, oh yeah, I'm working on white balance, and then go set your white balance accordingly. There is another scale that you can use for setting your white balance, which is there's a reading in Kelvin, and it's basically talking about the temperature of the light. And a lot of professional photographers will work on the Kelvin scale. Sometimes if you're trying to match up to, like, I'm using an LED panel light here for this, and it's 5800 Kelvin. So I set my camera on 5800 Kelvin. I know exactly what the light is and what the camera is reading, so we're all speaking the same language. Same thing if you're triggering remote strobes, if you're using a speed light, if any kind of artificial light source. If you know the color of that light, then you can just set it numerically exactly to what it's supposed to be, which is really helpful. So topic number 2 for today is the idea of watching your background. So a cluttered background makes for sometimes a very distracting element in a photo that you don't want to have distracting. For example, if you're taking a picture of a kid and the kid is, behind the kid, there is just absolutely just tons and tons and tons of stuff. That image, the attention that you want on the face of the child is going to be pulled away by all of this other stuff in the image. So sometimes even just by turning around in the room and having a more peaceful wall or some more calm thing behind them can really help. When you're outdoors, one of the things that I watch for very carefully, I hate having cars in the background of a portrait. If I'm out and I'm shooting a portrait session at a park, while I'm setting up the shot, a lot of things need to happen. You need to have the light coming from the right place. You need to have a flattering everything. But then if all of that is good, and then behind them is like the fender of a car, that really takes away tremendously from the quality of the image than if you had just found a place where there was just like beautiful trees or a shrub or a lake or whatever. So being mindful of your background is a pretty big deal when you're starting to really focus in on creating great photos. Another tidbit, and it's kind of, maybe I should have saved this for another day, and maybe I will bring this out as a separate topic on another day, but when you're framing your photo, watch for elements that are really close to the edges. If you have something that's really close to the edge, but it's an important part of your image, that's going to introduce a lot of tension. It's going to introduce a lot of like, why is that thing so close to the edge? At the same time, if it's not a necessary thing and it's near the edge of your photo, you should crop in and get rid of it. You don't want that distracting thing. And the closer it is to the edge, as a general rule, the more like it's going to nudge you that, why is it even in there? So that's it. That is the quick and easy non-tech tip of the day. Stay safe. If you are enjoying these little tidbits, please subscribe to the channel. Feel free to share it out. I'd love for as many people to see this as possible, and obviously with social media, the way to do that is for folks to share it. So I would appreciate that tremendously, and be well and have a great day. Were you recording or talking to someone? Oh, how's she?